that. Perfect. So this is a meeting that will be recorded. So if you know of your colleagues that happen to miss it, they will get access to this, and also you all will as well once it's available. And so I just wanted to have this webinar around this time because we are moving into the analysis of the applications, and this can be the part of this process that can be a bit uncomfortable. So I wanted to make sure that you all got the information that you needed as we move through this. Please take this opportunity to ask questions. And even after this, if you aren't comfortable in this setting, asking questions, please feel free to reach out to me via email or phone. We're going to kind of move through this. I may not be able to see you all just based on my view of this presentation, and you're all in here. So if I don't see you raise your hand, please feel free to interrupt me.
Yeah, we can talk before we start. We can chat and
just unmute yourself and talk as if I don't see you. So I will try to, as I go through this, pause and ask if there's any questions. But if something isn't clear, please don't let me move on until it is clear for you all. I want to make sure this process, because it is very different than it has been in the past, is clear to you all as we move into the analysis of the preliminary application, but also into the final application. So here is the timeline. As we've moved through this process, we have added dates. So please take note of a few dates that have become a little bit more clear for us. So in particular, the final application will be available in SM Apply on June 5th. I am going to get into a little bit more detail in terms of what that looks like and what that process is. The commission meeting in July has been moved by a day. In the past, it said July 26th. It is on the 27th, which is a Thursday. So I also wanted you all to make note of that. I also just wanted to touch base on the May 31st, June 1st meeting, where the Grant Review Committee is going to get together and review preliminary applications. We've been pretty intentional this time around of having new members on the Grant Review Committee. And so there are kind of tried to expand the viewpoint and the perspective of people who have experience in different types of courts. And so we have people who have experience with veteran treatments courts, mental health courts. And so it's kind of a well-rounded perspective that just isn't focused on drug treatment courts just because they're the most common type. And so we did hold a pre-review meeting last week. That recording is available upon request. I think it was sent out, but if by chance you didn't get it, we can get it to you. And the point of that, I will get into a little bit more detail as we go through this, but the point of that was just to set some guardrails for the preliminary application review and to develop a structure of sorts of what kind of information the Grant Review Committee is going to need from CJC staff as they go through that. So any questions on this timeline? Okay. So the final, oh, yep. Jessica.
Rachel, I did have a question. Can you go back to the previous slide? This is Jessica Beach. Not that that matters, but so the June 5th, the solicit budget requests.
Mm-hmm.
Can you review what that is versus the June 30 final application due?
Yeah, so that is the final application, the June 5th. That's when we are going to, and I'll get into this in a little bit more detail on a slide, but that is when we are going to request budget requests based on feedback from the Grant Review Committee. So that is the final application. That's when it will be available in SM Apply. And when you'll also receive feedback from the Grant Review Committee. So you'll have a little bit of guidance in terms of what needs to be turned in on June 30th.
Okay, great. So just confirming the actual final budget piece, phase 2 is not due till June 30.
Correct. Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so the final application, again, this is a new process, so if something isn't clear, please raise your hand and ask questions. So the budget projection sheet, which was part of the initial application that we released, it was in PDF form, so y'all could get a look at it. The format has changed a little bit, so it may look a little bit different. We changed the narrative piece in the budget sheet, just so that y'all could have an opportunity to say a little bit more, and we wouldn't miss anything in terms of an explanation or anything like that. So it may look a little bit different. I will go over the different categories. They are different. Those have not changed, but they are different going into this round. So I want to make sure that that process is also clear. So all of this will be available. You can download it from SM Apply on June 5th. Any requested funding should be focused on the adherence to standards. Okay, the grant review committee is going to be providing very specific feedback regarding your preliminary application. And so this is going to include a funding request recommendation. And this is going to go out via email from CJC's staff on the same day that the application is available in SM Apply. So you should get an email with very specific feedback from CJC staff on the 5th, the same day that it's available to download the budget projection sheet. And then you'll also, along with that, have the opportunity to update any sort of information in the narrative because something has changed. The grant review committee recommended a change. Any sort of updated materials, particularly those documents. I know some of you were waiting on signatures or waiting on drafts and indicated that you would be able to upload them or they just weren't available. You will have the opportunity to do that. And in SM Apply, it'll be able to walk you through that process on how to upload those as well as download the budget projection sheet. So any questions on when this is going to be available? Any questions on this?
It does look
Yes.
like we have a question in the chat. Any general idea when we would be notified of our grant award?
Like the overall, like what you received? Not until after the commission meeting on the 27th. Okay. Any other questions on this? Perfect. Okay, so the budget projection sheet does look different. It used to be where it was part of the application. You would just fill in boxes in SM Apply. This is actually going to be downloadable. It's going to be an Excel spreadsheet. There's two sheets. Okay, so if you only fill out one and you're not allocating any money to OJD, that's okay. If the county is allocating money to OJD, then please fill out the two different sheets. So there's county expenses and then there's OJD allocated expenses from the county. Okay, so this is very similar to what we did this biennium, this current one. The process is just a little bit different. And so we want to simplify this. And so it's very straightforward. There's county expenses, and then there are OJD expenses that are allocated to OJD from the county. Okay, this document will be locked, and so you cannot add any additional rows or columns. Okay, so please be cognizant of that. We try to provide enough space for budget requests, but in particular categories, but there you will not have the ability to add anything. And the reason why is because we just want to make sure that we don't miss stuff, right? We want to make sure that it's consistent, that it looks the same. We have a somewhat of a short amount of time to go through this between when it's due and the commission meeting, or the second grant review committee meeting. And so we want to make sure that what we get is accurate and we know where to look. And so we don't miss anything. And so when you go through, there are some columns within each category that will require text. There's some that are a drop down. It will guide you through. It's pretty straightforward. If you have questions, please reach out. Okay, if it's confusing or it doesn't make any sense, please reach out. With the narrative section, I did mention that we moved that. It's going to look a little bit different. Please make sure that you're succinct, but you're very thorough. And so try to balance that with each budget request in explaining it. Make sure particularly that CJC staff and the grant review committee are not in a position to where we may have to infer what you mean. Okay, so be clear, provide as much detail as you think we're going to need to understand what you're requesting and why you're requesting it. Okay, and again, please ensure that it's complete. 2 sheets. If you're doing OJD allocated expensive, it is on the second sheet. In red, it will indicate this is county expenses, this is OJD expenses only. And so it's pretty clear. Just please make sure that all the sections are complete. And make sure that the totals for each category and the overall total are accurate and correct. Okay. We are going to go off of what you give us and what you tell us. Okay, so please make sure that it's accurate and it's correct before it's uploaded into SM Apply. Just a note on the OJD sheet. OJD is going to have an internal process for putting that together, for putting OJD specific requests together, and then they're going to send that back to the county so that the county applicant can then add that into their application. So expect some communication, court coordinators in particular expect some communication from OJD regarding that process. Rachel, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, thank you. So to John, excellent question. There will be an internal process, and we're sharing that with the TCAs tomorrow. And then we'll be sharing that process with all of the coordinators on Thursday. So there will be an internal process, and we should have everything, all the materials laid out super clear for all requests on the OJD side.
Perfect. Thank you. Keep in mind that the court coordinators in particular, that this is due on the 30th. The RISE conference, the week-long RISE conference is that week. So please plan ahead talking with your county team to make sure that that particular portion of the application is done and to them so that y'all don't miss the deadline of the 30th. So please think ahead. I think Kathy, I saw your hand up if you have a question.
Yeah, hi Rachel. I just wanted to be really clear. So our OJD department is going to submit a budget to myself and I'll include it in my application. So that will also mean I'll need to have a contract with OJD for them to receive that money, which is how we used to do it and was pretty problematic. So am I hearing that correctly or?
No, so actually it's, we have this process in place to avoid that. And so what the county allocates to OJD on that expense sheet, CJC will then have a contract with OJD so that you don't have to.
Oh, thank you
Okay.
so much for that.
Yes.
Seriously, that really helps.
That's why it's part of this budget process and why there are 2 sheets. And so you're going to be submitting them at the same time, and then we will keep them separate. But then we will also, we will be the ones that have the contract with OJD so that you don't have to.
Thanks again.
Okay, perfect. Any other questions on this? Todd?
Thank you, Rachel. Are the expenses for OJD still limited to personnel and incentives, participant supports?
We're going to get to that, yeah. So
Thank you.
we made them pretty narrow, but yes, we will go through very specific categories because they do look a little different than they did last time. So any other questions on this process? Does everybody understand that there are 2 sheets, the county and the OJD? And please make sure that if the county is allocating money to OJD, that those 2 sheets are complete before submission. Okay. Okay, so kind of along with what Todd was asking, on the county side, there are, that budget projection sheet, the budget categories are gonna look a little bit different. We will have personnel, contractual services. We do have housing and facilities, which is new. It used to be, categorized in other participant supports or even other sometimes. We don't have those categories anymore. And so it's just housing and facilities. We also have equipment, which is a new one. I do want to note that these definitions are in the budget projection sheets along with the categories. And so you don't have to memorize this or have this presentation when you're doing the budget projection sheet, but we just wanted to provide it to you all today in case you had any specific questions about these definitions, but these will be provided in the budget sheet. So the new ones for budget categories are housing and facilities and equipment. And then we also have supplies. This is where participant supports can be included. Just make sure you're specific about what those are. There is training and associated travel. Make sure, so this is a little bit of a different definition. In the past, it's usually been training and travel. This is associated travel, so make sure that it matches. And then we do have administrative costs, which will be, I think it was indirect costs last time, so those are very similar. Any questions on these? I know that those that request drug testing, if applicable, it can go into contractual services or supplies. I know that that's one that was common, as well as medical needs. Depending on what that process looks for y'all, it can either go into contractual or supplies. Just make sure you're clear. And if you have any questions or there is any sort of confusion about where something goes, please reach out. Okay. So this is the funds that can be allocated to OJD. So this is the second budget sheet and the budget projection sheet. There is personnel. Please note that the definition for this is a little bit different. It's for personnel employed by OJD. If I go back to the definition of personnel on the county side, it's employed by the grant recipient. So there is a difference. We did try to make this particular budget sheet very clear and succinct and narrow. And so there's not a lot of confusion about where funds are going or where they fit. Same thing with supplies. This can include participant supports. I believe in the past with OJD's budget categories, some of those have fallen into the other category. Make sure that they go into the supplies category on the OJD sheet, and then also training and associated travel. So those are the three budget categories that are available for OJD allocated funds. Any questions about this?
We do have another question in the chat. Is the OJD allowed to claim administrative or indirect costs? OJD uses the de minimis rate in calculating its indirect costs.
That's a good question. That is something that is up to the grant review committee. And so it's something that if it is a request, we can take it to the grant review committee. I don't actually know how that process would work, just simply because it's county allocated money to OJD. And so we would have to work through that process. But that's not something that CJC staff can decide. It's up to the grant review committee, really, in all of these, as to whether or not they're going to award funds. So
Rachel, that was a question from me, and this is Tuji.
okay.
Thank
Does
you.
that answer your okay?
It does.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Before we move on from this, just so you all, I'm going to say this again. There are two sheets. There are county sheets. Okay, county expenses. The categories are a little bit different. Please read the definitions. If you are confused about where they go or about this process, please reach out to us. And then there are funds that are allocated to OJD from the county on the second sheet. And these three categories are what are available for funds that are allocated to OJD. Okay, if there are any questions or confusion or anything that doesn't make sense with this process, please reach out, but particularly before you submit. So, does anybody else have any
I do.
questions?
I
Yep.
do.
Okay.
Hey, Robert Wilson just put this in the chat too. There's no equipment category for OJD. And just this morning, we're trying to work through some equipment purchases for my courts. And so I was just curious about that.
Yeah, so there's also no housing. I know that has also been used in the past in OJD. Those are categories that are available on the county side. And so that's a discussion to have with the people who are in charge of the budget in general, right? Because the county people are the ones that are deciding to allocate money to OJD or not. And so we tried to make this as narrow as possible, just so that it's very clear as to what can go to OJD and what cannot. And so equipment along with housing, those kinds of things that have been available in the past are going to stay on the county side. And so it just requires a conversation with you all with the county budget and where that goes, if it's necessary, if it is going to be a request that you're going to make. Any other questions? Is there anything else in the chat that I'm missing? I don't have access to the chat, so I just want to make sure people are getting their questions answered.
I don't see anything else.
Okay, thank you. Okay,
Rachel, can I throw something out real fast?
Yep.
Thanks. Just to the question about equipment. So the way I'm understanding that with the $5,000 threshold. I mean, so something, if there was an equipment purchase that was less than $5,000, it likely could fall under supplies and would still be allowable. That's what you're saying, right?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay. So like I mentioned before, we had a pre-review meeting with the grant review committee last week. And so I just kind of wanted to go over a little bit about what the analysis from CJC staff looks like, and then the structure of the grant review committee and their analysis is going to look like on the 31st, because that is going to inform how you make your budget requests. Okay, so again, this process is a little bit different. So as we go through this, if something is not clear, please ask questions. So we looked at CJC staff looked at adherence to standards, and we did that through very specific questions from the SCOP, the Specialty Core Operating Profile, SCMS data, and the narrative. And we took those and we put together what we're calling a score sheet, more or less. And this is where we're going to pull information, these score sheets. We're going to pull information from this to present to the grant review committee. Okay, so the grant review committee saw this exact slide last week, and so they're available, or they're also aware of what this score sheet looks like. What we did is we took the standards, and also if you can't see this, let me know. I believe I have an example and that I can make a little bit bigger, but we just kind of wanted to show y'all what it looked like. We do have some that we scored, and we do have some because, again, we're trying to establish a baseline and establish a foundation in this round of things that can be measured and adherence to standards. Some of these are just going to remain recommendations throughout this round of funding. And so we wanted to provide this just to get a good idea of all of the things that were considered. So these particular scores, the 41 at the top, you can look at the bottom, there's a 41 out of 50 that were available. Everything went into consideration to develop this score. And so it wasn't just this score sheet and how that score ended up being. We considered documentation, we considered narratives. Sometimes we change scores based on the information that we got from those. And there is a data piece in here with standard 8, where we did include the SCMS data with completion rates, average participation, and then capacity. And so we took all of this and developed a score sheet that will be made available to you all on the 5th, along with your feedback received from the grant review committee. So you will get access to this. The idea is that these score sheets, they will remain a bit of a living document in the sense that they will change as we go through the next biennium, but it's going to provide, the idea is that it's going to provide a really good foundation for you all to get an understanding, not only where the grant review committee is making recommendations, but where each court sits in general as we go through the next biennium. So from this analysis, it is the role of the grant review committee to provide guidance and recommendations for funding requests that will meet the needs of each court. And so in this, the red part of this particular score sheet is where we identified this particular court not meeting standards. And so that's the purpose of this, is to give the grant review committee that information so that they can make a recommendation of a funding request that can address these potential challenges from this particular court. So any questions on this and this process and this analysis? Okay. So a little bit differently than the last couple of years, I think we've always looked at it by county. We are going to be grouping it by court type. So the analysis is going to be done by court type. And so drug courts are going to be looked at together. Mental health courts are going to be looked at together. Family treatment courts are going to be looked at together. And we're going to group each court by their overall score. And so the idea behind this is that we will be able to bucket each court based on their overall score. We used the median to go back to this score sheet. We use the median on a lot of these things, and simply because sometimes it's more advantageous to use a median than it is an average. It makes it so it's a little bit more straightforward and a little bit more clear. And so based on the median, we are going to be bucketing each court within their court type by their overall score. And that overall score for each court is going to determine the level of analysis that the grant review committee has requested. So remember, this is just structure, right? These are things that the grant review committee talked about and discussed last week. And so, for example, they might just look at the score sheet to generate feedback if that's what's needed. Others might require a little bit more information, particularly maybe pulling the data, something from the narrative that is going to give the grant review committee a little bit more information as to how they can generate feedback. And so this is intended to be a mix of what we've provided, our analysis, the CJC staff's analysis on the score sheet, and then what the grant review committee may ask for on the 31st. So every court is going to get some analysis, but the level of analysis depends on the overall score of that particular court. And then CJC staff will prepare funding recommendations for the grant review committee to consider based on the score sheet. And then the grant review committee, based on the score sheet, their analysis on the 31st, is then going to be able to provide very specific feedback and funding recommendations that will target adherence to standards. Okay, so the difference in this process than the last few bienniums is this is going to be pretty specific feedback. And so I know in the past it has kind of been, the budget has gone in with the application and it's ask for everything and hope you get something kind of approach. This is going to be, because of the feedback, the very specific feedback, ask for what you need, particularly as it relates to the adherence to standards. Any questions on this slide? If I wasn't clear about something.
We do
Please
have a
ask
couple
questions.
questions in the chat. The first was surrounding the analysis being done by court type. How will that be done for hybrid courts?
Yeah, so we have actually worked with the OJD specialty court team, particularly with those, and they've helped us identify. I know there's one in particular where there were 2 SCOPs turned in, and so they helped us kind of identify cracks within each court. And so if there's a court that is a behavioral treatment court and a veterans court, which one was actually more prevalent and which one was a track. And so we considered those, and and then the ones that turned in multiple SCOPs, we also considered those scores and combined them when appropriate. And so just leaning on kind of OJD specialty courts expertise and being able to tell the difference between the two, we usually went with the type of court that was named first. And so if you have questions about where they're grouped in your particular court, you can reach out. I'll let you know. But in the past, they've usually been grouped that way as well. And so we just kind of relied on information from OJD, but also we wanted to make sure that we were consistent. And so, if it's a behavioral treatment court / veterans court, it's probably more than likely going to be grouped in the mental health court section. Does that make sense?
And then the next question is, do LIPSICs have to approve the final application as well?
It's a good question. Technically, they are the applicant. And so, yes, I mean, we want, we don't need any sort of letter of support or anything like that. But it would be in everybody's best interest if that conversation happened and they were aware particularly of the budget requests that were going in. So we don't have a formal process for that, but it's probably in your all's best interest to have a conversation if you're a court coordinator with the county people and vice versa, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Any other questions? Before I move on. Okay. Okay, so this is just a little bit about the process that came out from last Wednesday, a bit of a continuation. So funding recommendation priorities will be based on the needs and improvement for adherence to standards. So that is going to be the focus of the grant review committee when they look at your preliminary application. So it's identifying gaps, it's identifying the need for resources, it's identifying what you do well and where there's room for improvement or where a court is particularly experiencing challenges, and a funding request might help that. And so specifically looking at how those standards are operationalized by the court and making sure that these funds can support that. And so grant review committee is going to be pretty intentional about their feedback, just simply because we are anticipating a little bit less of the funds that we've had in the past available. And so we have to make sure that we are intentional about how CJC funds support these courts. So again, please listen to the specific feedback given by the grant review committee and request what you need. So there's limited budgets, there's more applicants. I think last time we had 47 applicants, this time we have 52. And so please just keep that in mind as you're making requests. The grant review committee will also consider capping the total ask on spending trends in the 21-23 biennium. So let me just be clear, this is not a decision that they've made, but it is about the process that they're going to go through in analyzing these applications. And so they're going to be considering that, and they may ask for that information to be provided, again, because they're trying to get a sense of adherence to standards, but even more specific, how those standards are being operationalized and the operational cost of a court and what is needed, what funds are needed for that particular footprint. They are going to consider prioritizing the funding of court coordinators. And I think the only analysis there will be looking at FTE, which is done every time. And so we will be providing that information as well. And then they're also going to be ensuring that the final budget requests that are submitted on the 30th align with the Grant Review Committee recommendations. We recognize that there might be some things outside of that feedback provided by the Grant Review Committee that y'all might need to request of CJC funds. We know that. And so that is why we've provided a narrative on the budget sheet to make sure that you have the opportunity to explain, you know, yes, we understand that this was feedback, but we also need this. And so the Grant Review Committee is very aware of making sure to balance that out. But they're also going to have an expectation that their feedback and those funding requests are considered in your all's overall final budget request. Any questions on this? Anything in the chat that I'm missing?
There is nothing in the chat right now.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so that is all I have. I just wanted to give you all space if you have any questions about the process. Remember that it will be available, your feedback, your score sheets will be available on the 5th, as well as the opportunity to download the budget projection sheet. There are 2 sheets. I know I've said this a couple times. Please make sure that those are correct. The totals line up before you upload it into SM Apply and hit submit. Don't forget, you also will have the opportunity to submit any other documents or any changes to the narrative that you would like to, particularly if the Grant Review Committee, they may ask of that. So you'll have the opportunity to do that as well. And it is due on the 30th of June. And I believe the Grant Review Committee meeting on the 19th, I think that's correct, of July, to review those final budget applications. And then the following week, the commission will then hear those recommendations for final approval. Any other questions?
We do
Hey,
have a
Rachel.
request to put the slide deck in the chat.
We will be sending this slide deck out later on to all of you, so you'll all have access to this for sure, along with the recording. Okay. Jennifer, I see you.
I just have a general comment feedback after phase 1 of the application process. If we could maybe, as a group, agree to be mindful about our contacting about kind of status updates. We ran into a situation in ours where we had confirmation off of the SMS site confirming our applications were all submitted well before the deadline, but yet I had to turn around and like the following day get contacted and respond and prove basically that we had completed the task because TCAs were monitoring the submission of applications, but kind of like it was more of a timing issue that showed that we hadn't submitted. And then we had, unfortunately, voicemails left on program managers' phones that are like covering while people are out on FEMLA. So it caused, well, everyone was coming from a place of really good intent, and I want to honor that. It did cause some heartburn by everyone just, wanting to make sure that their individual county succeeded. So if we could just kind of like maybe be mindful in this next round, in order to try to kind of avoid some of that heartburn.
Yeah,
I
that's great
appreciate it.
feedback. Yeah, of
Thank
course,
you.
that's great feedback. I will say that this particular grant program is unique in the sense that there are the applicant is the county, and yet there is a specialty court team that is involved in this process. And so maintaining that balance of communication can sometimes be difficult. And so what we try to do is communicate to both the county and OJD coordinators to make sure that everybody is on the same page. We did have the reason why we do that is because every year we do have applications that either come in late or there's a miscommunication between who's actually hitting submit and who's actually doing the application, just because there is a unique process, I guess, with all of the courts. And so this is good feedback for us in terms of the timing of the communication. But we try to, what we don't want to have happen is just assume that the application is going to be complete and submitted and then not communicate to the specialty court team, the court coordinators who have a very heavy hand in the application process, or vice versa, to not communicate to the county of what the court coordinators are trying to do. And so this is kind of the first time that we've used our partnership with OJD to communicate that. And so this is good feedback for us in terms of timing. We won't get it right every time. And so if there is heartburn, we apologize. But we're just trying to ensure that the applications are submitted on time, and also that everybody is aware of what's in the application, but also that it has been submitted. So that is great feedback in terms of the timing of the communication for sure, and we can continue to work on that. But we tend to try to over communicate. If you've ever looked at even this particular meeting, our email list, I think this goes out to like 72 people just to make sure everybody gets this. And so, and even then we miss. And so good feedback. We will try our best, but just have some patience as we try to kind of work this communication process up.
No
Any other,
worries.
what do you say?
No worries. I just kind of
Okay.
wanted
No, it's good
this year's a
feedback.
new
This is-
process, and and unfortunately we have some key people that are out, so there was a lot of like fear when suddenly
sure,
there's a
yeah.
voicemail of like so
Yeah. And also in that, if there's ever a question of something that's been submitted or not, you can always reach out. And we can tell you what we're waiting on or what's missing and things like that. So but yes, that's great feedback, and we will continue to work on that communication piece. This was a lot of information. You all will get a copy of this along with the recording when it's available. So please, if there's anybody on your team that didn't make it today, please be sure to pass this along to them so that everybody, again, we want to make sure everybody's on the same page and has the correct information, just because this process is very different. So any other questions or comments? Okay, well, enjoy the rest of your day. I hope it's beautiful and the sun is out wherever y'all are. And please reach out if you have any other questions.